after we have learned about the critical point, breaking down the deliverables, now we will see the next pointer. And before moving to the next point, that is identifying dependencies, I want to analyze, do you identify dependencies and constraints in your project before planning? What are the constraints? Everything is not perfect. Like if we take a project, for example, we take a framework, new framework building ERP projects, right? So which is a complex one. ERP itself is huge, so we can't say that it will turn out to be perfect. It is not practical to think like that. So in those projects, you might have certain constraints. For example, there might be certain limit where for the new technology to handle the users. So there could be n number of constraints. And on the people front, on the resources front, you may have mentor the team for in the new technology. That could be another constraint. So every project, some constraints of the projects, trust me, they are like that we have to just accept it. We can't have solution for it. For example, the client's VPN for the user testing. So all these things comes under the constraints of a project. So first of all, a very critical, whenever expert project manager gets a project, what they do is they identify the constraints and dependencies in the project. So it's very, very important to identify the constraints and dependency of the project. So when we talk about identifying dependencies, it's very critical that we should know every project. Again, it is different, because when we talk about one project, it is totally different from the other. So it might be a small project or a large project. The constraints and dependency identification is different for different projects. So when we talk about an expert project manager, it's very critical to know an expert project manager knows what to identify the dependency, and they are very practical. Which one we can accept and which one, if it needs a prioritization, it has to be fixed immediately. Now we move on to the next, studying in detail about identifying the dependencies. First is you need to find out true dependencies, because it could happen that some projects, for example, we are talking about the website project. So it could happen that you are nowadays the projects are very complex. We are handling one part, but due to certain conditions for the cost basis or for the budgeting, the client can give the content part to the another person or another vendor. So since they don't want to give the whole chunk to you, so it can happen. So there could be a dependency that, see, for website the content is important, so certain crucial contents could be given to other vendor. So it's very important to know what are the true dependencies and how it can impact your project. So identifying the true dependency is the first step for the expert project management. So it could be which deliverables depend on other and also in a project, identifying dependency is one is the external dependencies, like for example the other vendor or the third party you are dependent on. In some cases, the project organization, they depend on metrics kind of systems. For example, I was handling a project which was an insurance project, IT project, and it was a huge project for 50, of consisting of 50 to 100 members. But the main part of the project, the core team, actually it was a product, insurance product. It was being built by some other team sitting in some other location, geographical location. So we are definitely dependent on them on fixing certain patches. Yeah, the interfaces and the customization was done by my team, but still, since if there is anything to be changed in the core logic, we were dependent on the core team. So but the core team was loaded with other clients work, so it could happen that they get back to you in 4 days, 5 days, so it happens. So the finding out the true dependency whenever you work in such kind of project, it's very important that you need to have contacts so that you can get the things done very quickly. So all these things happen. Since many of us start out doing projects in which simultaneously project manage and do all the work, we need to do all the work. Initially, it also depends on certain projects. We are alone. We don't have, when we are building a project from the project team from the scratch, we are alone. And sometimes due to the cost issues of the project, you're not being given the team. In such cases, it's important that we need to identify when you are alone handling or you have a small team, you need to definitely start analyzing the dependency. It is easy why the project fails or the project managers fail, because in such situation it is easy to assume that there is no dependency and everything will happen sequentially. Initially, I have done the similar mistake when I was a project manager for the first time. I used to think, yes, everything will happen sequentially, like as traditional SDLC. That is, first you will have a requirement gathering, then you will have a coding, and it will fall in place. But trust me, it doesn't happen. So as a project manager, as an expert project manager, the knack, the whole skill goes in that how you identify the dependency. For example, one dependency that I have handled in my project was resource dependency. It, we can say that it is the most common in all the domain, whether you are working in FMCG, whether you are working in manufacturing domain, whether you are working in IT domain. It's very easy. Yeah, it is more or less we are very much dependent on the resources to get the work done. But when the project runs for years, the dependency on the resources gets increased. So it is again a kind of true dependency. So when we say that resource dependency, then how you will handle it? Because just keeping the dependency on check doesn't matter, right? You need to handle it. You need to find out the solution, because resource dependency, it could be very risky in certain cases. For example, I have handled a two people project where the entire, which was running for years, 3 4 years, and even though it was a support project or whatever project, but if the one resource gets he or she goes on leave, then the project works get piled up. So in such cases, it's important have the documentation in place and get other you can ask your management, get a resource and for the temporary basis, and get him or her a mentor. So resource dependency, one another if in large projects, for example, if the reframing of the ERP comes in, so it's always important to divide it and always important to attach one resource with the core person, so that the knowledge does not go with them, because it's a IT. In IT industry, the iteration rate is very high. So it's very important to deal and identify the resource dependency and deal accordingly. When you're on your own, you're typically only able to work on one item at a time. So you work on the one task after the other. So it also happens that when you are handling a project alone, then it can happen that you are there is no dependency. But there are projects where they have multiple project managers. Then, as I told, you are dependent on the other project managers to get the status, to give the status, or you can have a many project leaders and you have a dependency on the project leaders to give the statuses of of individual team to just so that you can present it to the senior manager. So there could be n number of dependency. So when we call a resource dependency, the only reason why the two deliverables can't be worked on in parallel is because you have a limited number of people. So if there is a large number of resource pool in your project, I really hope that it's a actually, when we say that in your team you have such a large number of resource pool, it is a heaven for the project managers, for project managers, trust me, nowadays. But if you have that kind of a pool of resources, then definitely you are luck. But some cases, like I told, you have a very limited number of resources, then the resource dependency increases. You will end up in putting some task in sequence because of resource restriction, but leave that until later. For now, try to focus on the work that by nature demands to be done in sequence. So if you, for an example, you have only two resources in your project, then how you will do it? You have to identify. Again comes the prioritizations in the picture. So you, when we talk about the smaller bandwidth team, you cannot have a parallel work, because if you have only 2 to 3 members, then how you will do a parallel work? You can sequence out certain priority tasks and get things done. So identifying dependency and it all depends that how you handle the whole project scenario practically. Dependency identification can help you recognize holes in your initial breakdown of deliverables. It's only when we look the dependency for each section that we realize that we haven't actually got the site design in the plan. Certain times when we identify the dependency, then it's very important to know, we can just find out the loopholes in our project, because it is human that we have not considered those dependency in the initial plan itself. And it can happen, for example, because we are a dend human, and suddenly the complex structure or the dynamic structure of the project in practical, in real time scenario, project managers are given projects which they have not involved in the during in the initial stages. So you're just being given that project in between, and you're not aware of the client, you're not aware of the, I have handled such project. Then as an expert project manager, it is the first thing you need is to sit with the other project managers who have handled the project and understand the requirement, understand the client, understand and identify the dependencies. For example, I have taken over a project where there was 50 to 100 team members. It was an insurance product, and first I did is to identify the resource dependencies, who are my core team, so that when you're not having that much knowledge about the project initially, it's important that you gain the knowledge from your team members and identify your core member and form a team. So identification of the dependencies helps you to know what are the loopholes. All the sections, like for example, all the sections of the website design that we have seen an example that we were planning to build depend on some agreement on an overall design. So if we talk about the website design, right, so it depends, the whole website design is dependent on the two crucial items, that is, one is content and one is interface. So it all depends whether the whole schedule depends, and you can achieve the timeline only if the client approves the layouts. So likewise, every project has this whole true dependency that needs to be identified. And because before the overall design is being completed, or else you need to uh, kind of redesign the whole thing. And when we talk about parallel work identification, I can give you an example that when we are talking about the large projects, for example, again I'll go back to the example of redesigning the framework in new technology of an ERP. Then in such projects, if the client has given you a deadline, you don't know the new technology, you don't know the old framework very well, then so that you can build those features in the new framework. So what you will do, it is important that first you build a prototype and you identify the parallel work. When you identify the parallel work, when in such large projects the sequencing is not there, then kind of you're able to handle the deadline, and you will save definitely your time from managing sequence work. Many a times I have seen that all the teams, because in large projects when you have a 50 to 100 members, you can divide them into teams, and all the teams, they don't perform in the same level. So if you sequencing out, one team will finish, one team will not finish, then how will you will be able to handle the end project date, that is the deadline set by the client. So it is important to identify the parallel work. So these are certain tricks and strategies that a expert project manager can make, so that you are able to be on time for the project, you are achieving the time limit, and second is the whole scope is covered, and third is your, if you're, see, it's always like that. For example, if you are going for a vacation, and if you are able to, you have spotted one itinerary, but it could happen that some of them like it, some of your family members like it or not, or there could be a dependence whenever we are traveling. There could be a dependency on the food, that sometimes in the location is exotic, but the food is not so good. So these kind of dependency, what we do, we just plan it out to mitigate it, like we take our own lunch or dinner, so it's so short trips, I'm saying. So likewise in project also, it is not that all dependency cannot be handled. As an expert project manager, it's our duty to handle it and form a team, and also communicate to them very clearly that see, these are the dependencies and we need to get over it. There could be some technical things, then we can go to the client and say that we are going to buy this tool, are you going to pay for it? So there are n number of things, the ways which we can handle. For example, if to increase the productivity, I have seen such clients where they agree to pay for it because it makes their life also easy, that they get the deliverables easily and quality product. So all these things, kind of negotiation also comes into the picture. After talking about the breaking down of the deliverables, then identifying dependency, it's a very, very crucial part about the project is about the estimation. And I know as a project manager, sometimes I really want some extraordinary to get the correct estimation. But in practical, there is nothing to be overwhelmed because estimation is again about the project to project. Some projects you're not aware, even the client itself is not aware of the requirement, and it takes experience, it takes a lot of practical observations for building the estimation. So estimation is very critical for any kind of project. Let's see the next pointer, estimating time. So it's not very as easy, but it's like we should not be overestimating or we should not be underestimating, because overestimating means we have ample of buffer time, then it's not worth it. And underestimating also, like then your team gets bogged down and you don't have a required time to finish the project. Estimating the time a project will take, it probably is the most and frequently overlooked by the project managers. That's why the project fails. So, but an expert project manager, they spend their maximum time in estimating the projects. Why? Because I'll give you a scenario in IT projects. If you are in maintenance project and you're working on change request, then it's one of the estimating time is very important, because in some projects it's very easy because your team is aware of the project, they are maintaining the systems for years, so they know the knowledge, and they have since they know, they have extensive knowledge, functional knowledge about the project, and so they can do a very correct estimation and it will be approved by the client because they know them very well. And so you will have a mutual relationship and they will approve those estimation. But the estimation is very difficult when you are handling a from the scratch product, you're developing a whole big project new. For example, you're developing a ERP system application from the scratch, then estimation is very difficult. If you are just acquired or very new to the client, then it's very difficult, because in those cases what happens is like the functional knowledge is not there, then you will be either underestimating or overestimating. If you don't have an experienced person who is technically sound, then also the estimation goes for a toss. So in such cases, it's very important when we talk about estimation. I will talk about project specific, right? So if you are handling a maintenance project, then what is the process you follow? I always give it to the senior people because they know the system better. But it is important that you get validated from the team member who's going to do the work. So in estimation, it's important because most of the project managers, either they will do the estimation or they will give it to some other team members or project leaders who are expert. So for example, a project leader can take 4 days to finish a work, but same job will not be similar for any average person who is not experienced, who is not technically expert. So you should find a middle path, right? So that's how it goes for the expert estimation in case. So also when it comes to estimation, it's very important that we consider, for example, if it is software, then how much we are going to develop a new project or application, then it's very important that you will take time for the building an interface, you will take time for building the database component. And so when it comes to maintenance kind of project where you have to estimate a change request, it's pretty easy, and usually most of the project will have those processes in place. But Let me give you an example for complex project handling. When you have to do from the scratch, you are handling a development project and you have to estimate those. So in those cases, and you are very new to the function knowledge, you don't know about the transactions which run through the application, and you don't know about the technology. In such cases, you have to bring in the experts from your organization and sit and analyze first of all what are the client's requirement. Then you have to do for one particular module and build on those in the phases and then estimate, because in such cases the requirement from the client keep on changing. So it is important to give for a small part. If they ask for a big part, it's not possible. So even though client pressurizes for giving you a big project estimation, it's not going to help you. And again, it's very important to consider the assumption and constraints of the project. So most of the project manager overlook this factor when they are pressed for time for the from the manager, from the senior management or the client. Many projects managers make the mistake of creating them estimate themselves by putting some random numbers, because I feel that it's not appropriate. Because if you put pressure from the customers, and because you need to give some ballpark figure to the customer, it is always, I have done that, trust me. I have given a situation where I have to deal with this client who I know for only 1 month. I was very new and they came up with a whole huge project requirement. Then I told very clearly that we will move in a iterative mode. First, I can give you a prototype, and in on that basis that estimation, and then we will approximately go step by step by building the transaction masters. So it is a sequential process, an iterative process. So it's the time frame, if it is given by the client, then definitely the estimation should be done by you with the internal team, because it is very specific for your project team. And you need to consider the assumptions, you need to consider the constraint of the project. The point of estimating is to predict how long the production of the various deliverables will take, so that you can build an initial project schedule. Although schedules are often mistaken for project plans, in fact, a schedule is just the one part of a project plan, because as per PMI, you have various other things which comes in the project plan. You have your scope, you have your quality processes which should come in the project plan. So it is one part. The key rule to remember when estimating time is this: the person who will actually undertake a given piece of work should create the estimates. Again, this situation and circumstances is all dependent on which project you are being given or which project you are going to handle. It can happen that when you are being handling a new development, you have to build a team. At those time, on those time, you don't have a resource, you don't have team, then how you will go about it? In those cases, I have handled in such a way that I go to the client, I tell them that this is high level estimates, but when the team comes, we'll analyze the requirements further, and then we can give a detailed estimate which could be revisited. So this one clause should be there in the contract, because what happens in, especially in software project, there is this whole time crunch, this pressure on the team, then the team gets demotivated, and all this happen because the estimation is done on a very high level when the project bidding happens. And at that time you are being given a team, and those at that stage they do a technical feasibility study, the technical architects. Some companies the process is differ from client to client, and due to competition the project has been, your sales team get the project and then they are just given to the project manager for their execution. In such cases, I have handled such projects wherein I go to the client and then I request for re-estimations, and I request a process to be fair. It will be a win-win situation for both client and us as a vendor team. In IT scenario, actual execution stage, the team can't work on the previous estimates which were made with a very high level when you are making a proposal. But when it comes to the actual execution case, there could be n number of change of requirement from the customer. So those things has to be in the estimation so that your project billing also increases. It is justified. And trust me, if you go and talk to the client and explain them the process and the quality which can get impact, they will understand. So here the project manager has to handle it through their contact and their negotiation skills. So it is as simple as that. If you're trying to estimate for work that will be performed by more than one person, that sub team needs to agree on an estimate together. So I have done it because if you just put an estimation as a project manager, and neither I have seen those project managers that neither you share it with your project leader nor your team members who are going to actually do it, then it is a disaster, because then client, you will be on some page, then the client will be asking you the deliverables, and it is a mess. But you have to come to an estimation. It is a work which is being done by the team of yours, and they should agree with it. Yeah, sometimes at the end we are dealing with people. It can happen that some team members, they won't agree with any estimates, they will come up with new solution. That's not that, but usually it is better to have a team meetings for such things if your team members are really mature to handle it and you have that rapport with the team. So ideally you're already having involved your team in the breaking down of the work into logical chunks and in working out the dependency. But even if you have got it alone on those part of the process, it's absolutely essential to involve them in the estimating process. Trust me, this is how any expert project manager does do it. I have always seen that those project managers who have disconnected the team in the process of estimation, yeah, sometimes project could succeed on some deliverables, but ultimately it is going to fail because you have committed the dates on your own assumptions. But at that end, it's very important to get the team involved in from the initial stage. Trust me, I have done it, because I have done it and I have been successful to achieve having project success with challenging projects with this kind of mechanism, wherein the estimation, because mostly in a complex project the organization will give you a good team, because at the end it is they face, if you deliver them, then there will be more billing will be coming from the customer. So if it is not, then you have to ask for the resources. That is again a resource management part of yours. But when we're talking about the estimation, it's very important that you lay out, whether you are laying out the estimation, whether your project leader is making that estimation, or your team leaders are making that estimation. Again, I'm talking about the large projects handling. Then in such cases, it is important to have, it is better to spend more time and ask the customer that time that you will discuss with your team internally. You need to discuss those estimation once they are aligned, because most of the time I will be really, I'm happy to share this, that sometimes because sometimes we don't go to that detail as a project manager, they also have certain set of insights of the project, like they will give inputs on the assumptions, they will give you inputs on the dependencies. When you're discussing those estimates, it helps. So why is this so important? Because estimates needs to be realistic. More than that, estimates needs to be realistic for the people who will work with them. How would you feel if someone come along and told you that the work you're going to do is going to take 1 week? If your project manager is lucky, then he is magically guessed as an achievable estimate. If he is unlucky, as you feel right now, he's gotten deadlines forced on you and he is going to be unhappy because you are never going to get the work delivered in a week. So trust me, these are the certain things which are overlooked by the managers due to pressure from the client. We are not doing it deliberately, but due to pressure from the client, we always give some ballpark. Sometimes we give some ballpark image, but it is ballpark deadline date. That's not going to work out in practical situation. It is very important to handle the client. If they push for certain deliverables, they say, yeah, certain cases it could be urgent business requirement from the client. That time you need to do it. Your team has to stretch and they need to deliver. But certain times it's important to tell the customer that no, this is not going to happen, because they will always, because it's their job from the client side. They'll say, I've paid you money, now you give me my product. But it is important to evaluate the project dates, and dates given by the customer, if it is given, it is very important to have them on the same page. So once you get involved the right people on your task. But how this estimating process actually work? So first of all, there are few techniques which work. Like it, all organization have their own template for estimation, and there is certain templates, and also certain projects they use FP method and complexities method. So there are various way. A few averaging techniques are available. You can choose the one you prefer. The options vary in complexity, but two simple equations are, you have to choose one most optimistic estimation and least optimistic estimation and divide it by 2. This is just the average of the longest and shortest estimates. So you can also do that. You can get your expert leads doing the estimation and get this average. Or there is second equation, that most optimistic estimate, it has to be added to 4 times to the most likely plus least optimistic and divided by 6. This point, it gives extra weight to the most likely estimate. Probably a more task once you have obtained your estimate is to work out how you feel about them. Your own gut feeling. As a project manager, you have experience that will also help. And the reliability of the estimates. Estimation is an art, and when we talk about estimation, it's very important for the project managers and expert for to become an expert project manager, that we tell our client clearly that estimation for more than longer time, like for 8 weeks, 9 weeks, it's not it won't be accurate. Yeah, sometimes the client wanted for an approval of the budget, for the approval of a budget from the user department, but mostly it is better to mention to the client that estimation, if it is more than 3 months, 4 months with a very detailed level, it's not practical, because requirements keep changing. So it's very important to understand these. In fact, it's very difficult to create accurate estimates for work that will be performed more than 6 to 8 weeks from today. It's I have observed that when you're working on a particular phase of the project, you can plan that phase with reasonable accuracy. For example, your team is working on requirement. So on that particular requirement, because usually what happens when we talk about the traditional project management or even agile, so the capacity of the team nowadays is very agile, because sometimes we put more resources, sometimes we keep less resources. So usually in the when you are following a traditional approach, and when again it depends on the project. If you are in a project where you know the client very well, you know the domain very well, you know the technicality very well, then it's very easy. It's not a big deal. But when we talk about a project which is very complex, you have to study. Some projects need external help, like technical expertise, not from your project. You can have organizational technical experts in your project coming up and helping you in analysis of the project in the requirement phase. So those things, it requires time, and in such cases you can plan only for those phases. So when you're working on a particular phase, you can plan for reasonably with accuracy for that phase, getting right down into the detail of what needs to be achieved. But the phase that starts 3 months from now, I think it is very difficult, because it is the things keep on changing. And why I'm saying this, because estimation, when once we do an estimation, again the time. For example, there is a task A, and again I'm talking about the IT project perspective, that can, for a resource for the task A, it can take some time. But for the same task A, the resource B can take more time. So it all depends on the various situation, and sometimes it also dependent on the external dependencies. The tool, you might have to purchase an external tool and it has not arrived. So there are n number of things when it comes to estimation, when it comes to the estimation, and also when actually we get into details and do it. I'll give you an example. I was doing redesigning of certain framework in a project, and in a very large scale application, web application. So initially when my company was in the bidding stage, it has given a very high level estimation, and also it was totally different. when we actually start executing the project, when we sat down with the customer. Because usually when the customer bids a project to the especially IT projects, they some clients they themselves have a very lesser idea of the requirements, and as they choose the vendor, as the team starts interacting, this is more about the business logics. Then the team starts interacting with the end users, then they start developing it. So it's a long process. It's not just a one process in one short scenario. It becomes a long process, so it's very important. But usually client pressurizes the project management, and trust me, I have faced this situation where the client pressurizes, when especially if you're in a, if your client is a public sector client, they pressurize you to, because they have lot of approvals. And so it depends on the experience to experience. But as a project expert, project manager, it's your very duty to tell the client. And if the client is not agreeing with you, then of course you can push the channels through your senior management and say that. Because at the end it is very it will be in good, it will be a win-win situation for your client and yourself, where you have to agree to a process. And once I was handling an insurance project, where IT project, wherein in insurance the dynamic is more, sometimes the rules changes and all. That juncture, if the client is asking an estimate at a very detailed level, it's not possible to plan for 3 months, 4 months for a support team. I'm talking not for a new development team, support team. So in those cases, it's very important that what is the client, if the client wants an accuracy, and if as a project manager, because we need to balance the parameters, it is not only the requirements, but you need to see the customer's happiness, with also we need to see the project budget. So it is definitely, because many a times the team, if they don't have very well function knowledge, it's not about the IT project or any other project. It happens even in all the phases, whether it is a construction project. In initial stage, when you are just after initiation, when you are collecting the requirement, where when you are in a very when you are in the planning phase, so the higher level planning takes place. But it is very important to put a clause to the customer that we will do a requirement gathering stage, we will see the requirement, what are your requirement. It could be in the construction, for example, a painting a particular room. So we need to, once the clients start discussing. And here one other important factor is the change. Because any customer, I'm very practically speaking, they don't, it is not possible, because sometimes the customer is very clear, but then suddenly the user requirements changes. And I have seen many times in IT projects, the project gets on hold because suddenly the user says we don't want this feature. So all these things comes up, so it's very important to consider these factors affect the estimation. Instead of planning the entire project in one go, you can use a rolling wave approach that gives a very rough broad based estimate for any deliverable. So many a time project managers use this approach. So for any deliverables, you can use a very broad base estimates for any deliverable that's too far out to estimate, and only putting the effort in breaking down the detail and estimating properly the works that comes in the immediate future. So in the rolling wave, usually I will suggest this rolling wave approach for the projects, especially in nowadays the dynamics are very high. The client keep, because they are not having your project as only project, single project, they handle multiple projects. So sometimes I've seen that customer takes weeks to respond back to your requirement queries. So it's important that you plan for the phase you are in, and do a detailing, you prioritize. So if you are in the current phase, you estimate for it. By communicating this approach, you will definitely, it will help you. And it can definitely give more accuracy. And trust me, there are certain conditions, because if you start giving over estimates to your customer, I have seen many project managers doing it under the client pressure. And definitely it is a thing to avoid, because at the end we will give some estimation, and which is yes, we'll say yes, it can be done in 2 days, but we need to consult to the team, we need to give an accurate estimation, because it hits the project. There are certain projects which are fixed bit in the scope. So those project gets highly impacted with this kind of estimation, where if the estimations are not proper, because sometimes looking at the higher details, we will think that yeah, this job can be done in 2 days, but actually when you go in detail, you analyze the requirement, then you will feel that there is loads of work involved in it, and maybe we would have estimated 2 days effort, but it could have been a 10 days effort. So all these things comes in the picture when it is making your life simple. Project management, it's not very complicated if we make it simple. It is including the estimation part. Then comes the adding contingency. Once your estimations are finished, usually you add certain contingency. Contingency is extra time that's allowed. What is a contingency? Have you ever added contingency in your project? I'm sure you would have been, because we cannot be very perfect in the estimations. We cannot be very perfect in the planning. So there needs to be adding some buffer on time and budget also. So it is an extra time that allowed in the schedule to cover unexpected events, such as the milestone that takes longer to achieve that you planned, a problem that's harder to solve than you realized, or certain basically it is a extra time you have added in your planning. As well as it caters to the unexpected event. It is a good way to say that it will be happening as planned, but it is always good to put that extra contingency time. So when you are breaking deliverables into milestones and estimating how long it will take to deliver them, it's normal to assume that everyone will be working a full way. When someone asks us how long something will take, we naturally assume that we are focusing on this alone. How long will it take? Reality could be just something different. So these situations happen, and I'm sure in IT project it happen daily, that you are working on one thing, because of the resource, we can't afford the resources, the priorities keep changing. So one resource may be assigned multiple tasks. So when we say that how long it will take certain time, the resource, and trust me, I have handled a project in my project management experience, had where this client used to keep on changing the requirements. And so then we just collaboratively work out a strategy wherein we have understood that there should be a process, that first there should be a requirement, then you clear the requirement. If you're not okay, if you are having a high priority issues, then there is a certain core team which we have identified, and those will fix the issues, or so we can work out like that. So adding contingency means when certain thing happens, like some priority issues come, you can use this time. So most people are working on more than one item at a time. Some efficiency is therefore lost due to task switching, the time it takes to shift from one job to another. As well as task switching, you will need to take into account all the day to day tasks that need to take care, like checking the email, and in support projects it could be the answering the call, attending the regular events, meetings, and in some cases in some organization there are a lot of HR trainings goes on which the individual need to attend, and other events. And also when we talk about holidays, certain time there is ad hoc holidays which comes in. So the traditional method has always been to estimate tasks, factor in dependency, and identifier where you have inherent contingency. Inherent contingency arises when you have one task that relies on another, and unavoidable time in between the two. So, for example, there is a task which is like we have to develop a new framework, but the coding cannot start unless and until you have a framework ready, because the whole application runs with that framework as a base. So I'm again talking on the IT product basis situation. So this is an inherent contingency. I can't ask my team to work on coding or transactional screen unless and until my new framework is developed. So this is a high dependency. So at that time, the project managers can use those time to mentor team on the new technology, ask them to work on the documents, study the existing application, and gain the functional knowledge. So, if task A is estimated to start on day 10 and to last for 3 days, but task B cannot start until day 16. In effect, you can take 6 days to complete task A before it will start to affect the project. In addition to these cases of inherent contingency, you will also deliberately add some contingency to risky tasks. What are the risky tasks? I would like at this point just analyze about your current project. You see that whether, yes, I have asked this question, that whether you have made any assumptions. Definitely you will have constraints of your project. It could be a people constraint, team constraint, or it could be a constraint related to technology, and different domains, different project have constraint accordingly. So now if you see that, have you ever seen any, there will be definitely in any project, again it depends from project to project. As a project manager, you need to identify, is there any risky task? I can give you an example. When we were working on, just remember this example of new framework, so which we were talking about in the last previous recordings. So when we talk about that, definitely there is a risky task that the team, because it's a new technology, when you are building a new framework, then definitely all the points which client want, because client will have 50 the features to be included in the new framework. But since to be practical, with the given time, also the technology is new, and definitely the team would be new, and on those perspective, the new framework will not have the 50 thing at once. So it is a step by step, phase by phase approach. So it could be one of the risks where the client is expecting at least 20 features in the first prototype itself. It happens in many practical ways. So we should identify those risky areas. Or in some cases, sometimes we have resources not that, who are not skilled, because there are sometimes resources due to time constraint, we won't get that kind of skilled and experienced resources. So in those projects, the area risky task will be mentoring the people and getting experienced people on the board so that they can just review the work of the inexperienced people. So all these things could be a risky task. So another way of adding the contingency is to identify the risky task and add contingency to it. This could either be achieved by increasing the estimate for those tasks or by specifically adding extra contingency in your schedule. Some practitioners suggest automatically adding 40% to any estimate to combat over optimistic tendency and to allow time for things to go wrong. So it all depends. I'm sure in cases of CMI level 5, who the companies who follow CMI level 5 latest version, or different versions of the, or some companies follow Six Sigma. So there are certain estimation template from the organization itself. So I want you to analyze your project and see that what are the risk tasks you have, and have you added contingency, and in your organization what is the percentage of the contingency that is considered. So when we talk about planning, so we are very clear, whenever there is a planning, it has to be planned very well, and it has to be planned on the deliverable wise, and the estimates has to be accurate. So that's the takeaway from this whole session. So because why deliverable based approach of planning? Because deliverable focuses on the end product. So when we talk about communicating contingency to stakeholders, so like estimates, contingency is another concept that's often misunderstood by project stakeholders. They want predictability, to know that there is a plan and that it will be followed exact. Usually, I think in practical situation, all the customers want a very neat based plan, and they want all the resources on their project so that the work gets completed because they are paying for that. Usually, there are risk tasks which are there in your plans. So often this need, we need to say in different style, we need to communicate the contingency to the customer. So there are certain contingency which can be communicated, and you and your, there are certain risk tasks, I can say, that can be communicated to your customer, where You can sit, basically sometimes it is UAT, the user acceptance of the product you have delivered. But there are certain contingency, there are certain risk tasks that you should keep to yourself, which is internal to your team. Because certain times the resources, you can't go and openly discuss the resource problems and all, because at the end client has paid you and you have to work, get things done. So whenever we have a communication of the plan, we have a communication of the dates. So there are certain things that you keep to yourself and there are certain things you present to your customer, that is your stakeholders. We could and talking again about the contingency, choose to add contingency to every milestone and deliverable. Giving an extra day, we can add certain percentage at the end of the estimate. So I want you to analyze that how you have done it for your project. So in certain cases, the kind of contingency gets used up on almost every project is when people tend to deliver a piece of work when it's due, allowing the work to expand to fill the available time rather than trying to meet the original deadline and preserve the contingency. So at the end, yes, we are allocating contingency and all, but when it comes to tracking, there are certain red alert projects where certain times the resources are not available. It is at the end we are dealing with people. Even though I have seen we add contingency, sometimes the project skips certain deadline and it gets 1 or 2 months delay from the actual project end date. So instead of adding contingency at the detail level, it is best to add the contingency at much higher level, like certain percentage. So rather than adding a day or a week in the entire task or something, we can add it on the whole estimate level. These are certain mechanism with which we can be successful, for which the project managers can use, so that we are well organized to prepare for the dynamics. But again, this is all about planning. There are other factors which are getting involved, like communication, and then we are dealing with the people. So there are people issues which project manager handles. So we have talked about the whole estimating time and how we can break down the deliverables. The next session will be on the risk part, which is very very important for today's world because of the dynamics is involved, and there is high risk when you talk about team members. Today you have a team, tomorrow you have the 2 3 people can leave at once your organization, you don't know. So risk are something which is need to be planned very well. The prioritization of risk keeps on changing. So as a project manager, it is very important to update the risk sheet.